Before we jump into today's story, I wanted to mention that I've started a new channel with shorter videos and a fresh style. If that sounds interesting, be sure to check it out through the link in the description. Alright, let's get into the story. I'm a 32-year-old guy, and I've been married to my wife, Andy, for about a year. She's 34, and honestly, until all of this started happening, I thought I had gotten incredibly lucky. We met, clicked right away, and took things slowly, mostly because of her daughter, Carrie. Carrie is 16 now, but she was around 14 when I first came into the picture. From the very beginning, I could tell she wasn't happy about me being around, which, to be fair, I understood. Her father had died in a car accident 5 years earlier, and Andy had been raising her on her own ever since. I knew from day one that building a relationship with Carrie wasn't going to be easy. I made it clear to Andy that I had no intention of replacing Carrie's dad or acting like I was some kind of substitute father. That was never my goal. I just wanted things to be peaceful and comfortable for everyone. Andy and I even agreed not to tell Carrie about our relationship until we knew it was serious. We didn't want to put extra stress on her if things between us weren't going to last. Eventually, though, we reached that point, and it was time for me to meet Carrie. I won't lie, I was nervous. Still, I went into it with an open mind, hoping she'd at least be okay with me being around. Unfortunately, that first meeting was incredibly awkward. Carrie looked at me like I had shown up to steal something from the house. She barely spoke, avoided eye contact, and made it obvious she didn't want me there. Every time I talked, she would roll her eyes or make annoyed expressions, and she wasn't subtle about it. I understood that she might have felt like her mom was moving on too quickly or that I was trying to take her father's place. But that was never my intention. I didn't want her to feel pressured into having any kind of relationship with me. I made sure she knew that too. I told her she could call me by my first name and that I didn't expect her to call me stepdad or anything like that. Andy kept telling me to give it time, and I thought maybe she was right. So I tried not to push things. I invited Carrie to join us for simple things, like going out for food or spending time together casually. If she didn't want to come, I never forced it. But every time I tried to connect with her, it felt like she pushed me away. I'd ask, "Hey Carrie, do you want to check out this new burger place with us?" And she'd barely look at me before saying, "No thanks," in a tone that made it seem like I was bothering her just by asking. One time, I suggested we watch a movie she liked, and she actually laughed. She said, "I don't think you'd get it," with this sarcastic expression on her face. Maybe it was just normal teenage behavior, but honestly, it felt like she wasn't even trying. Andy always said, "She'll warm up eventually. Just give her time." But after a while, I started wondering how much time I was supposed to give. Things stayed awkward. Every now and then, I'd think things were improving because Carrie would answer a question without rolling her eyes or sounding annoyed. But every time I thought we were making progress, things would go right back to the way they were. I remember one weekend when we visited Andy's parents for a family gathering. I thought maybe being in a neutral setting would help. It didn't. Carrie avoided me the entire time. At every meal, she made sure to sit as far away from me as possible. At one point, she actually got up and switched chairs because she felt I was sitting too close. I talked to Andy about it several times, asking if there was something I was missing or something I could do differently. But Andy always gave me the same answer. Just let her be. She's been through a lot after losing her dad. She'll come around eventually. I understood where Andy was coming from, but it started to feel like I was expected to quietly accept being treated this way without saying anything. Maybe I should have been more patient. I don't know. I kept telling myself things would get better, but they didn't. After a while, I started to feel like a guest in my own relationship, as if Carrie had already decided I didn't belong there, and no matter what I did, nothing was ever going to change that. Andy kept telling me, "She's been through a lot after losing her dad. Just give her time. She'll come around." I understood where Andy was coming from, but it started to feel like I was expected to stand there and take everything without saying a word. Maybe I should have been more patient. I honestly don't know. I just kept telling myself things would eventually get better, but they didn't. After a while, I started feeling like a guest in my own relationship. If Carrie didn't want me there, it felt like I didn't belong. I kept wondering if I'd ever be able to have a normal conversation with her without her snapping at me, ignoring me, or brushing me off. Andy always tried to play peacemaker, but I could tell she felt stuck in the middle. I never wanted her to feel like she had to choose between her daughter and me. And I know how this sounds. Some people might say, she's just a teenager. Give her a break. But this didn't feel like normal teenage behavior anymore. It felt personal. I'd come home hoping to have a normal, peaceful day, and somehow Carrie would find a way to make things uncomfortable. She'd make passive-aggressive comments, throw little insults my way, or give me that look that made it obvious she didn't want me around. The tension in the house became so thick that I felt like I was constantly walking on eggshells in my own home. Every attempt I made to improve things somehow seemed to backfire. And honestly, what was I supposed to do? I didn't want to argue with a 16-year-old. I wasn't looking for a fight. I just wanted everyone to get along. Looking back, maybe I could have handled some things differently. Maybe there was something else I could have tried. But I wasn't going to beg Carrie to like me, and I certainly wasn't going to kiss up to her just to earn her approval. I wasn't her enemy. I was just a guy trying to be a good husband to her mom. I understood that losing her dad had been a huge loss for Carrie, and I never expected her to forget him or suddenly treat me like her father. But at the same time, I didn't think his death gave her a free pass to treat me like dirt. I tried to be the bigger person. I ignored the comments, brushed off the attitude, and told myself that maybe she would eventually grow out of it. But I was getting tired. How much was I supposed to take? Andy kept telling me things would get better, but I felt like I was constantly waiting for some invisible better day that never came. Every time Carrie ignored me or threw another attitude my way, it felt like another slap in the face. It made me feel like I wasn't good enough to be part of their lives. Still, I convinced myself that things would change once we all moved in together. Maybe Carrie just needed to feel more comfortable around me. Maybe she felt like a stranger in her mom's relationship, and living under the same roof would finally give us a chance to get to know each other. I had never lived with a teenager before, so I figured there would be an adjustment period. I thought that, with enough time, I might actually get to know Carrie better. Maybe, as crazy as it sounds now, we could even become close. But if I had known what was coming, I might have thought twice before getting so serious with Andy. Moving in together turned out to be only the beginning of a completely different level of chaos. As much as I wanted to believe Carrie would eventually come around, the truth was that I was diving headfirst into a situation I had very little control over. And I was about to get one hell of a rude awakening. Eventually, we decided to take the plunge and all move into my place together. Honestly, I was hopeful. I thought maybe Carrie simply needed more time around me. Maybe she had always felt like a stranger in her mom's relationship, and living together would finally help break down those walls. I imagined we might eventually have one of those big family moments where everyone connects, and Carrie would finally realize that I wasn't the enemy. But I was completely wrong. The moment Andy and Carrie moved into my place, it was like Carrie flipped a switch. She went from being distant and cold to openly hostile. She started messing with my belongings, giving me the silent treatment, and treating me like I was some kind of intruder in my own home. Sometimes she would ignore me so completely that I'd actually wonder if she was pretending I wasn't even in the room. It felt like she saw me as some kind of threat that had to be pushed out at every opportunity. At first, it was little things. She'd leave her dishes piled up in the sink, which I initially chalked up to normal teenage behavior. I'd clean them and move on because I figured there was no point in fighting over every little thing. But then the behavior started escalating. I began noticing small acts of rebellion, little messes left around the house that seemed almost deliberately placed to annoy me. Towels were thrown all over the bathroom floor, dishes were left wherever she felt like leaving them, and slowly, I started realizing that this wasn't just ordinary teenage laziness anymore. She'd leave the garbage sitting around, forget to take it out, and leave random stuff everywhere. It was always something. I'd mention it to Andy, hoping she'd finally understand what was going on, but she'd just brush it off. She's going through a phase. She'll grow out of it. Then one day, I came home from work and walked into the kitchen. The moment I stepped inside, I froze. There was glass all over the floor. I'm talking about shards everywhere. It looked like an entire set of plates and cups had been smashed. At first, I assumed Carrie had accidentally dropped something, so I started cleaning it up. But as I picked up the pieces, I noticed something that bothered me. Some of the breaks looked intentional. These weren't the kind of cracks you'd get from accidentally dropping a plate. They looked like someone had thrown the dishes against something as hard as they could. I asked Andy what had happened. She looked stressed but still tried to downplay it. She's just frustrated. I'll talk to her. I stared at her. Frustrated? So now she gets to destroy things whenever she's upset? I wanted to say more, but I bit my tongue. I figured Andy needed to handle it, and maybe a serious conversation with her mom would finally make Carrie realize she'd gone too far. But it didn't. If anything, Carrie doubled down. She started focusing on the little things, almost like she was getting creative with finding new ways to make my life miserable. She'd leave half-empty soda cans tipped over on the coffee table, letting the drink spill everywhere, and then simply walk away. She'd leave it there for me to discover later. Another time, she dumped an entire bag of chips onto the couch, crushing the crumbs into the fabric. And when I looked at her, she just stared back at me like she was silently asking, "What are you going to do about it?" I told Andy again, "This isn't normal. She's deliberately disrespecting me." But Andy would just sigh. "She's going through a difficult time. Please, just be patient." Being patient was getting harder every single day. And yeah, I'll admit it, I have a bit of a temper. But I was genuinely trying to hold it together for Andy's sake. I didn't want to become the angry stepdad who was constantly yelling at his wife's kid. So I'd take a deep breath, walk away, and try to ignore it. But every time I came home, I had no idea what new mess Carrie had created. Then came the incident I'll never forget. It was the day I finally lost my patience. I had just gotten home from a long day at work. The second I stepped through the front door, I noticed this absolutely horrible smell. It smelled like something had died inside the house. I started walking around, trying to figure out where it was coming from. Eventually, I traced it back to the refrigerator. I opened the fridge and immediately regretted it. There was raw chicken sitting uncovered on the top shelf. No container, no wrapping, just raw chicken sitting there. And judging by the smell, it had been there for quite a while. Later, I found out Carrie had taken it out because she supposedly wanted to prepare a meal. Her words, not mine. Then she simply forgot about it and left it there. I called her downstairs, doing everything I could to keep my voice calm. "What happened here?" She just shrugged. "I forgot." That was it. No apology. No explanation. Nothing. I ended up cleaning the entire mess myself, muttering under my breath the whole time and trying not to completely lose it. But a few days later, she managed to push things even further. I went into the garage to grab something and found several of my tools lying on the floor, completely covered in mud. Apparently, Carrie had been messing around in the garage and decided my tools were basically her personal playground. I picked one up and asked her, "Why are my tools covered in mud?" She looked at me completely expressionless. "I needed them. So what?" That was the moment I finally snapped. I raised my voice, probably louder than I should have, and told her this was my house and she needed to respect my belongings. Andy heard the argument and came rushing in, immediately trying to calm us down. "Please, don't make things worse." But at that point, I was done. I looked at Andy and told her straight up, "This can't keep going. I'm sick of Carrie's behavior." Andy looked hurt, but honestly, at that moment, I didn't care. I had spent months trying to be patient. I had tried being the nice guy. I had tried ignoring the disrespect. And Carrie was still treating me like I was nothing. I wasn't going to keep living like that. Andy promised me once again that she would talk to Carrie. I actually laughed. Sure, maybe this time it'll actually work. But the very next day, Carrie pulled her most ridiculous stunt yet. I woke up, went into my office, and discovered that she had unplugged every single cable connected to my computer. It took me nearly half an hour just to figure out what she had disconnected and get everything working again. And that was when it finally hit me. This wasn't just some teenager going through a difficult phase. I was dealing with a kid who seemed to genuinely believe she could do whatever she wanted without caring about anyone else. And I was reaching the end of my patience. At this point, it felt like Carrie believed she could get away with absolutely anything. Every little thing she did started to feel like a personal attack. I couldn't walk into a single room without wondering what kind of chaos she had left behind for me to deal with. And every time I brought it up with Andy, she'd say the same thing. "She'll come around. Just give her some space." Well, I had already given her all the space I had. I was slowly losing my mind trying to keep everything together while Carrie continued messing with my belongings and acting like none of it mattered. It was only a matter of time before I finally reached my breaking point. Looking back, maybe I could have handled certain things differently. Maybe there was something I could have done that would have changed the situation. But honestly, I was exhausted. I was tired of always being the one trying to keep the peace. I was tired of feeling like I had to wait for Carrie to decide whether I was worthy of even the smallest amount of respect. And deep down, I was beginning to wonder if moving in together had been the biggest mistake I'd ever made. Then came the night everything finally fell apart. This was the moment when I truly had enough. I had been putting up with Carrie's attitude, her messes, and her constant disrespect for what felt like forever. I kept hoping things would eventually improve. But looking back, I realized I was just fooling myself into believing anything was going to change. Because what she did next crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. It started like any normal evening. Andy and I decided to go out for dinner, just the two of us. We hadn't had a proper date night in a long time. And honestly, I desperately needed a break from the constant tension at home. Andy was always telling me I needed to focus on the good in Carrie. The problem was, I hadn't seen anything remotely good from that kid in months. So, yeah, I was looking forward to a few peaceful hours away from the drama. After dinner, we drove back home and pulled into the driveway. The moment I got out of the car, I noticed something strange. The garage door was wide open. I knew I had closed it before we left. I'm pretty paranoid about things like that. And even if I had somehow forgotten, it was late at night. Carrie should have been inside the house, not hanging around in the garage. Immediately, I felt like something was wrong. I walked into the garage and froze. Right in the middle of it was my car. My pride and joy. My BMW X5. And it was completely trashed. I'm talking about slashed tires, deep scratches running down the sides, and what looked like a broken side mirror. There were even scuff marks across the hood, like someone had actually been stomping on it. Then I saw her. Carrie was standing right there with a kitchen knife in her hand. And somehow, she looked completely calm. My blood ran cold. I couldn't believe what I was looking at. She just stood there with this smug little smirk on her face, almost like she was proud of what she had done. I could barely get the words out. "What the hell, Carrie? What are you doing?" She simply shrugged, completely casual, like she hadn't just committed an unbelievable act of vandalism. "It's just a car," she said. "Just a car." That was it. I lost it. I had spent months holding everything in. I had ignored her little stunts, cleaned up her messes, and kept quiet because I wanted to keep the peace for Andy. But this was beyond anything I could have imagined. I called her a spoiled little brat and told her to get the hell out of my sight. I know I shouldn't have yelled, but at that moment, I honestly didn't know what else I was supposed to do. She had deliberately destroyed my car. Then Andy came running into the garage, probably because she heard me yelling. She looked at the car, took in all the damage, and somehow, instead of getting angry at Carrie, she turned to me calmly. "It's not as bad as it looks. She's just acting out. Don't make things worse by yelling." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was standing there staring at thousands of dollars in damage, and Andy was telling me that I was making things worse. I just looked at her, completely speechless. How could she possibly defend this? I told her, "This isn't acting out. This is criminal behavior. She needs to face consequences." But Andy didn't want to hear it. She tried pulling Carrie away, saying they would talk about everything in the morning and that we all needed to calm down. I wasn't calming down. Not after what Carrie had done. So I looked at Andy and said it right then and there. "If you think this is okay, if you're actually fine with Carrie destroying my property and treating me like this, then both of you can leave." Andy's jaw dropped. She clearly hadn't expected me to say that. "You don't mean that," she said. "You're just angry." But I wasn't just angry. I was done. Done with being disrespected in my own home. Done with the constant messes. Done with Carrie's attitude. And done with always being made out to be the bad guy while Carrie got a free pass for everything she did. I told Andy that if Carrie didn't pay for the damage, I would take legal action. Yeah, maybe that sounds extreme, but I had finally reached my breaking point. And there was one thing Carrie hadn't counted on. I had security cameras in the garage. Everything she had done was recorded. There was no way she was going to get away with it. After I said that, Andy's face went pale. She started tearing up and accused me of being heartless and taking things way too far. Then she tried to guilt-trip me. Carrie is going through a lot. She's been struggling ever since her dad died. I understood that. Losing a parent is brutal, and I wasn't ignoring what Carrie had been through. But grief doesn't give someone a free pass to destroy another person's property and then show absolutely no remorse. I told Andy, I'm sorry for what Carrie is going through, but this has gone too far. This kind of behavior isn't normal, and I'm not going to pretend it is just to keep the peace. We argued back and forth for about 15 minutes. I kept telling Andy that if Carrie didn't pay for the damage, I would take her to court. Andy kept telling me I was being cruel just for suggesting it. It was like she was so blinded by her loyalty to Carrie that she couldn't see the damage her daughter was causing, not just to my car, but to our entire relationship. And honestly, that was the moment I finally realized something. Andy was never going to see it. I had been fooling myself this whole time, thinking that eventually she would understand and stand up for me. But there she was, defending Carrie even after the girl had slashed my tires and destroyed my car. I looked at Carrie one last time. She was still standing there without a single ounce of guilt on her face. That smug little smile was still there, like she had just won some game I didn't even know we were playing. That was when I made my decision. Both of you, get out. Pack your bags and leave. They looked completely shocked, as if they couldn't believe I was actually serious. Andy started begging me to calm down. We can work this out. Carrie didn't mean it. But I was beyond caring at that point. I was done trying to fix something when it was obvious that nobody else was interested in making it work. As they left, I stood there staring at what was left of my car. I felt more drained than I had ever felt in my life. I had spent an entire year trying to make this family work. I put up with so much because I loved Andy and genuinely wanted a life with her. But in the end, Carrie's actions showed me exactly where I stood. And Andy's reaction proved it. That night, I sat alone in the silence, wondering how the hell everything had gotten to this point. I felt stupid for letting it go on for so long. I kept hoping things would change, even though deep down, I knew they probably never would. But one thing was finally clear. I wasn't going to let Carrie, or anyone else, walk all over me anymore. This was the last straw. I had finally had enough. After they left, I sat there in silence with this strange mixture of anger and relief. I kept looking out the window, half expecting Andy to come back or Carrie to storm through the door with another tantrum. But nobody came back. For the first time in what felt like forever, the house was completely quiet. That was when it really hit me. It was over. The entire year had been one long cycle of me trying to make things work, bending over backward to keep everyone happy, and constantly trying to avoid another argument. But now that they were gone, I finally understood what real peace felt like. And honestly, it was amazing. I went back into the garage and looked at my car again. The slashed tires, the deep scratches, and all the damage Carrie had caused were still there. Seeing it made me angry, but at the same time, it felt like a reminder of why everything had to end. I didn't feel guilty for telling them to leave. Not after everything Carrie had put me through, and not after Andy had spent so long brushing it all aside. I knew I had made the right decision. There was no going back. That night, I slept better than I had in months. I didn't have to worry about stepping on broken glass in the kitchen. I didn't have to wonder where my tools would be scattered next. I didn't have to walk into a room wondering what kind of mess Carrie had left behind. For the first time in months, I actually felt at home in my own house. The next morning, I started thinking about what came next. I knew I had to deal with the car, figure out whether I wanted to repair it or replace it. I also considered filing a police report if things went that far. But for the moment, I just wanted to enjoy the quiet. I wanted to feel like I was finally in control of my own life again. Then, as the days passed, I started getting texts from Andy. At first, she was just checking in and asking if we could talk. Then came the long messages. She told me how much she missed me, how she believed we could still work things out, and how Carrie had only been acting out because of what happened to her dad. It was the same explanation I had been hearing from Andy all along. And honestly, reading those messages only reminded me why I couldn't keep doing this. I had given this relationship everything I had. I had tried to make things work, but Carrie kept pushing every button I had while Andy continued defending her. I ignored most of Andy's texts because I knew that if I replied, it would just turn into another endless back and forth. She would try to convince me to take them back, and I wasn't interested. I had made my decision, and I was sticking to it. A few days later, Andy showed up at the house. Since I hadn't answered her messages, I guess she decided to try talking to me face to face. I opened the door, and there she was, looking emotional and apologetic. She started telling me how difficult things had been for her and Carrie. She talked about how Carrie was still struggling with losing her dad and said she thought I was giving up on them too easily. I just stood there and listened. But the longer she talked, the more I realized that nothing had actually changed. She was still making excuses. She was still defending Carrie. And she was still refusing to see things from my side. Eventually, I stopped her. I've put up with this for a year. I gave everything I could to make this family work, and all I got in return was disrespect and chaos. I'm done. She looked hurt, but I could tell she still didn't completely understand. She started saying things like, "Carrie will change, and we can work through this." But I wasn't buying it anymore. I told her, "You had an entire year to teach her that she couldn't treat people like garbage and get away with it. You did nothing. I can't live like this anymore." There was a long, uncomfortable silence. Finally, Andy nodded and said she understood. For the first time, I think she realized that I wasn't going to back down. I wasn't going to let Carrie walk all over me anymore, and I wasn't going to change my mind just because Andy wanted me to. She tried to say a few more things, but I simply told her goodbye and closed the door. I wasn't going to let her guilt trip me into changing my decision. Once she was gone, I felt this huge weight lift off my shoulders. For so long, I had been holding onto this picture of us as a happy little family. But looking back, that was mostly a fantasy I had created in my own head. The reality was that I had been living in a nightmare. And finally, it was over. Over the next few days, I started putting my life back together. I focused on fixing up the house, organizing everything, and making the place feel like mine again. With every little thing I changed, it felt like I was reclaiming my own space. And slowly, I started feeling like myself again. Of course, people started asking questions. Friends and family wanted to know what had happened and why Andy and Carrie were suddenly gone. I kept my answer simple. It just didn't work out. Nobody really pushed me for more details, and honestly, I was fine with that. I didn't want to sit around rehashing every horrible thing Carrie had done or explaining why Andy never stood up for me. The people who knew me well could tell that I was happier. For them, that was enough. There were still moments when I looked back on everything and felt a little sad. Maybe even a little regret. Not because I missed them, but because I had invested so much time, energy, and emotion into something that ultimately turned into a complete mess. I wanted a family. I wanted to be a supportive partner to Andy. I wanted all of us to have a good life together. It just didn't work out that way. And eventually, I realized something important. It was better to be alone and happy than to stay trapped in a toxic situation where I was constantly being disrespected. One day, while cleaning out the garage, I finally decided it was time to get rid of some of the things Andy and Carrie had left behind. I threw out random junk, old clothes, notebooks, and other things that no longer belonged in my life. As I cleaned, I felt like I was finally moving forward. Like I was closing that chapter for good. Final update after everything that happened. Andy reached out again and asked if we could talk. I'll be honest, I wasn't excited about meeting her. But part of me thought maybe the conversation would give me some closure. Maybe, finally, she would understand my side of things. So we met. Almost immediately, she started talking about how we could still work things out. She told me I needed to be patient and wanted me to come back and try again. She promised that Carrie would eventually get better and insisted that this was just a difficult phase. But I was done. I had already been patient. I had given Carrie chance after chance for an entire year while she destroyed my belongings, disrupted my peace, and made me feel like a stranger in my own home. And every single time, Andy allowed it to happen. I looked at her and calmly said, "I'm sorry, but I'm done, Andy. I can't keep doing this." I explained that, for once, I needed to think about myself. This wasn't just about one incident. It was about an entire pattern of disrespect, excuses, and chaos that had been going on for far too long. I could tell Andy still didn't completely understand. I think she genuinely believed everything could be fixed if I just tolerated Carrie's behavior a little longer. But that was the problem. I didn't want to tolerate it anymore. I was tired of waiting for a teenager to suddenly decide to respect me. I was tired of Andy constantly defending her. And most of all, I was tired of feeling like an outsider in my own home. So, in the end, we ended things for good. We ended up signing the divorce papers pretty quickly. Thanks to our prenup and the fact that we had kept our finances separate, the process wasn't nearly as messy as I expected. We basically sat down, signed the papers, and that was it. There was no reason to drag things out any longer than we already had. In some ways, it felt surreal. I remember thinking, is this really it? But deep down, I knew ending the marriage was the right thing to do. The amount of relief I felt afterward was all the proof I needed. Of course, there was still the issue with my car. That part got complicated. My insurance company refused to cover the damage because vandalism apparently wasn't included in my policy. That meant the entire $6,000 repair bill was on me. Seeing that estimate honestly felt like another punch in the gut, especially after everything else I had already dealt with. I told Andy directly that Carrie needed to take responsibility for what she had done and cover the cost. But, unsurprisingly, Andy didn't have the money. She had moved back in with her parents and was struggling to find a place of her own, so there wasn't much she could do financially. For a while, I debated whether I should just forget about the money and move on. But then I thought, why should I? Carrie needed to understand that actions have consequences. I was tired of being the person who always had to clean up the mess after everyone else. So Andy and I worked out an agreement. I would pay for the repairs up front, and she would pay me back every month until the full amount was covered. We even put the agreement in writing so there would be no confusion later. I wasn't going to leave something that important to chance. And because I had filed a police report, Carrie ended up with a criminal record. I know some people might think that was too extreme, but honestly, if you had been in my position, I think you would understand. She had deliberately destroyed my property, and I believed she needed to face the consequences of her actions. Maybe now she would understand that you can't just destroy someone else's belongings and expect nothing to happen. The weeks that followed were actually pretty strange. At first, coming home to an empty house felt weird. I had gotten so used to the constant tension, the messes, and the attitude that the silence almost felt unnatural. But after a few days, something changed. I started feeling lighter. It was like someone had finally taken a massive weight off my shoulders. I didn't have to worry about stepping on broken glass in the kitchen. I didn't have to wonder where my tools had been left. I didn't have to walk through my own house wondering what kind of disaster I was going to find next. For the first time in months, I actually felt peaceful. My friends were also great throughout the whole thing. I told a few of them what had happened, and they completely supported my decision. They kept telling me that I had done the right thing and that I needed to stand up for myself. Honestly, hearing that helped. There were moments when I wondered if I had made the right choice. After all, it's not exactly normal to kick your wife and stepdaughter out of your home. But whenever those doubts came back, I reminded myself of everything I had put up with. I had spent an entire year being patient, understanding, and constantly bending over backward to keep the peace. And where did that get me? A $6,000 damaged car and a stepdaughter who treated me like I was nothing. No, I didn't regret my decision. Not even a little. And to everyone who commented and told me I wasn't the bad guy in this situation, thank you. I know that might sound cheesy, but your comments genuinely helped me. It's strange how sometimes you can get a clearer perspective from people who don't even know you than from people who have known you for years. Reading the messages and seeing people support my decision gave me exactly the reassurance I needed to keep moving forward. Every now and then, Andy would still text me. Nothing major. Usually just a short message asking how I was doing or checking in. I ignored most of them. I wasn't interested in going over everything again or letting myself get guilt-tripped into questioning my decision. Andy had made her choice when she repeatedly sided with Carrie, and I had made mine. The last thing I needed was to get dragged back into that same mess. Now that everything is behind me, I'm focused on getting my life back on track. I've been working on little projects around the house, fixing things, organizing everything, and making the place feel like mine again. It's amazing how different everything feels without all that stress hanging over me. I've started reconnecting with friends I hadn't seen in months. I'm making time for hobbies I had neglected. Most importantly, I'm finally taking care of myself again. And honestly, it feels pretty damn good. So yeah, It's been one hell of a few weeks. But in the end, I feel lighter. I feel free. I have my peace, my space, and my sanity back. And that's worth far more than anything I could have gained by staying in that situation. Here's to moving forward. And once again, thank you to everyone who reminded me that I wasn't the bad guy in this mess.